All right, be prepared, parents. There's some great wisdom coming up for you with this next guest. And it's all about the gifts that you're giving your children. And those gifts don't cost any money. Let's find out.
Building spirituality, family, health, and business. This is The Giant Builders with Lois Wyant.
Hi, Giant Builders. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. And today's guest is Rosemary Olender. Hi, Rosemary. How are you?
Hi, Lois. I'm great. Thank you.
Great. Well, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Okay. I've been an educator and a consultant and an administrator for over 4 decades now. And what I am on a mission now since COVID was I published a book in April of this year called Coffee and Wisdom: A Father's Legacy to Leading a Rich Life. And it came about from a conversation I had with my dad the night before he passed away. He took some time to tell me he wanted to apologize to me for leaving me and my sister with nothing. That kind of shook me up, and I looked at him and said, I know you're sick, but are you out of your mind? Tony's my sister. Tony and I consider ourselves to be two of the richest people in the world. We won the lottery the day we were born to you and mom. And he was confused by that. He said, I don't understand. I'm leaving you with no money in the bank, a house that has no marketable value, and a used car. And I said, Dad, those are not the things that made us rich. The things that made us rich were the multiple gifts you gave us our entire lives. And he looked very confused and he didn't know what I meant. So I said, well, let me explain to you what I'm talking about. Out of that conversation came my recollections of growing up with him in my childhood, and then my years in high school and college, and my professional career years working with thousands of families and teachers around the state of New York. And so I talked to him about those gifts. The book is set up around those gifts. Each chapter, there are 12 chapters, and each chapter is about one gift that was critical to the development of me and my sister, and what is critical for children to have so that they can grow up to be rich. For me, richness is resilient and independent and confident and happy, which leads ultimately to success, regardless of what life throws at you. So the book has the gifts he gave us, which were, I recanted 12. I probably could do another book on more as I've gone around and thought about it. But they were things like humor, time and presence, um, rituals and routines, and compassion and empathy, perspective, things like that, that meant so much. And the way I've designed the book is so that each chapter is a gift, and the first section of each chapter is a discussion of why that gift is so important in a child's life, to grow up with it and to see it. And then there's a list of reflections from my life that demonstrate how that gift was given or talked about or shown by my dad and the people around me. And then the third piece of it is a list of suggestions and some tools that parents could use to give that gift, many of which I'm sure they're already doing, but some may be helpful or they could tweak a little bit that would make a difference. So that's essentially how the book is set up. And what I realized is that it's not about money, and what I'm trying to do is show parents that, parenting is a journey. It's not a destination. And like any journey you take, it has its wonderful, divinations, the kinds of things you find out about what you're seeing and what you're experiencing. It has roadblocks, it has wrong turns, it has all kinds of things, just like any journey does. And what I'm hoping to do, because I don't know if I'm sure you've noticed that in today's hustle culture. There's so much pressure on parents
Mm.
to provide stuff, to provide more time, more money, more resources, more information, more, heck, more of everything. And what I want to do is show parents that they can slow down, they can relax. And there are just a few key things that they can do, but also to say these are the important things in a person's life to grow to be resilient and successful.
That is so wonderful. What a great way to honor your dad. That's really cool. So, wow, I'm just like, oh, okay, I gotta go order my book.
He was, like I said, it started out as a tribute to him. But
Mhm.
as my beta readers read the book, and some of my friends who knew my dad, and some of my newer friends who never met my father because he passed away 30 years ago. What I'm being told is this is the kind of stuff you did as a teacher and administrator with families here and now. This is a critical message to get out, especially today when there's so much unfettered cruelty and there's so much, divisiveness and people just judging each other all the time. You need to get this out there. And the other thing a lot of them said to me is, I didn't have a parent who did that. I didn't have a parent who talked to me like that and said, how do you feel about this? See, the reason the book is called Coffee and Wisdom and the book cover shows a table with cookies and coffee is because the one thing my father gave us that was so important was his time and his presence in our lives.
Mhm.
And one of the things my father did with me and then with my sister, who was 13 years my younger, and he did it with her too, was from when I was young, he would come into the bedroom and say, are you done with your homework? Even in elementary school, are you doing anything for school? Are you ready to go to bed soon? And he'd say, come in the kitchen, come and have a glass of milk and some cookies. Well, when I turned 12, I wanted coffee, so it became coffee. So from 12 on, it was a nightly, literally a nightly cup of coffee. It's almost like it was our ritual. We didn't go to bed unless we chatted, even for 15 minutes. Sometimes it was 2 hours, and my mother would say, hey, you two, she's got to go to school. You got to get to work early in the morning. Enough is enough, because he was the kind of communicator that would say to me every night, how was your day? We'd talk about our days. How was your day? And he wouldn't let me get away with it was okay. It was fine. And then he'd say, well, why do you say just okay? What happened? What could have made it better? He was a master at treating a conversation like an onion, and he would just peel the layers off and say, why, or what did you think about that, or how did you feel about that? When your teacher said that to you, how did that make you feel?
Mhm.
Why? And we would talk about it. So I was trained to be a critical thinker from a very young age. And so his time and his presence was key. And then in a lot of those conversations and in his behavior, is where I got the gifts that he gave me, like the gift of humor. There's a chapter in the book, The Gift of Humor. My father believed that humor is an excellent way to diffuse very serious negative situations. He was a glass half full person for the most part, but he really thought even if the glass is empty, let's see if we can turn this into something that we can use or make it an opportunity, or we could laugh about it and say, okay, well, I didn't need to drink that anyway, kind of thing. I'll give you an example. One time when I was 14-ish, I was in junior high school. I was helping him install a window air conditioner
Mhm.
in our second floor living room. And he adjusted it slightly and it went onto one of my fingers. And I pulled my hand back and he turned to look at me and the air conditioner just went right out the
Oh
window.
no.
And I was like, I'm so sorry. And he's like, it's okay. And I'm like, but Dad, it's so hot and we need the air conditioner. And he just looked out the window. He came back and he went, well, that puppy's dead. And I said, well, how can you laugh at this? And he said, well, he goes, I can laugh because no one was under it, so nobody got hurt. It's only a thing. And yeah, we might not be able to afford a new one right away, but we have fans and we'll use those in the meantime. Not a big deal. So through humor, I learned resiliency. I learned how to find an angle around a tough situation. It was that kind of thing. And people people loved this sense of humor and sometimes didn't appreciate it. One time with my uncle had a brand new car, first car he ever bought, new. And he was so proud of it. And he was washing it 2, 3 times a week. And then it was summer and a drought came along. We didn't have rain for a while. And the mayor came on the news and said, basically, please don't water your grass and don't wash your cars. We need to conserve water. And my uncle was beside himself. So my father said, well, let's take the car down by the river and we'll use buckets and we'll clean it with buckets. So they did that. And my uncle drove it. And my uncle had the idea to back the car up a
Oh,
little bit closer to the river. Yeah. And he forgot to put the emergency brake on.
oh
So
dear.
when he got out of the car, my father was standing outside the car. When he got out of the car rolled back and the back tires went into the water.
Mhm.
And my uncle tells me this story. My father didn't. My uncle told me. And my uncle's jumping up and down and yelling. And the more he's yelling, the harder my father was laughing. So finally he stopped and he said, what are you laughing about? And my father said, Joe, we have a tow truck. We'll pull it out. We'll take it to our garage. We'll wash it up there, as best we can. It's not a big deal. We didn't lose it. It's not floating away. We
Yeah.
can take care of this. So that's the kind of thing he did. And those are the kinds of stories that are in each chapter to
Mhm.
explain. Another thing my father that I think in the message I really want to get out there, because my hope is that if children are raised to be happier and more resilient and more kind and empathetic, our world is going to get better than it is right now. And we've got to stop blaming each other. My father, there's a chapter in there on perspective and empathy. And at my dad's funeral, one of his buddies who spoke a few words said he was the least judgmental man he ever knew. He always tried to put himself in someone else's shoes
Mhm.
and say, okay, what are they doing with, what's going on there? But what my father did for me in simple terms is he said to me, one time I came home and I was very distressed about a teacher, something the teacher had done. And he said, well, what did the teacher do? I said, well, he walked into the room and there was a garbage can, the garbage can was there, and he just kicked the can across the room, startled everybody. And I thought, what a jerk? And I was really angry. And and my father said, well, why do you think he did that? And I said, how would I know? And he said, well, imagine, he said, let's think about this for a minute. It was your reaction to what he did, but let's think about what he did. What if each of us had a ticker tape across our forehead that told people where we were coming from, what had just happened? He said, now imagine if that teacher's forehead said, my doctor told me I had cancer this morning. Would you still be as upset with him? And I said, well, no, of course not. He said, okay. So before you get angry or before you get upset, I want you to just pause and say, I can say I put myself in somebody else's shoes, but I don't know the baggage they're carrying. I don't know what they're coming into this situation with.
Mhm.
And so, again, the chapter on perspective and empathy kind of says, think, pause, slow down before you react, and just think about things.
So which gift stands out most to you?
I think for me personally, the one that stands out the most is time
Mhm.
because I had his presence. And, you know, I'm lucky I didn't grow up in an age where people were looking at phones, so when I had his attention, I had his full attention. He wasn't although he was an avid TV watcher, and he would have loved to be alive today so he could stop what the TV said and talk to me and not turn it off or whatever. But he very rarely, if ever, said to me, "Not now."
Mm.
He would usually say, "Give me a minute, let me take care of this." He would come and visit me when I went to college. He would come and visit me on Sundays once a month, and he would sit in my room and talk with me. We would go to lunch and he'd come back and we'd sit for maybe an hour, and he'd start talking and my friends would come in. Well, my friends got so used to talking with him that it became sort of like a round table with Augie. They
Yeah.
would come and he would ask them the same questions. What are you studying? Which teacher's your favorite? Why? Are you struggling in anything? Why do you think you're struggling? Are you trying hard enough? And he would have conversations with them and they loved it. In fact, some of them came home with me on holidays instead of going home, you know. So as I worked professionally, I watched for these things in my families that I taught and in my families that, needed my help as an administrator and thought, okay, what are the things that are important? So I think time and presence is important. I think humor is important, perspectives. I mean, they're all so critical. You put them all together and they make one big sort of a recipe for richness
Mhm.
of character. And what I try to say, my signature talk is put your wallets away and raise rich kids because it's not about money. It's not about money at all. And I had friends that I grew up with and friends in college and even friends as an adult now that have lots and lots of money and their kids have money, and I had friends who got a car when they got their driver's license at 16. They got the first iPhone that came out or the first computer that came out. And I never had any, we were a middle class, lower middle class family, but I never felt poor. I never felt like I wasn't rich. Now, granted, I had food on the table. I didn't have to worry about food security or any of those things. But my father was a real believer that you really need communication and tightness in a family. He was a very, very family oriented man. We're Italian and the culture is family, of course, but he believed that traditions and rituals were key. That's another chapter in the book. And because when you have rituals and busy families can have a 10-minute ritual, they can have a ritual that happens when they're all in the bathroom brushing their teeth. If they decide that's a time they're going to do something. And
Mhm.
I tell parents, you don't need an hour, you don't need 2 hours. If you're walking your children to school, that's maybe a 5 or 10 minute walk. Use that time and make it meaningful. Take small small moments that might not be that meaningful and make them really meaningful. I had teachers who would take ordinary moments and make them extraordinary for children.
Mhm.
And kids would come back years later and say, "Remember when Mrs. Dunn used to do that with us in school?" And they remembered that. I had a teacher who, one of the strategies teachers have is when kids, especially in elementary school, would come into the room, they're all excited, they're talking about what's going on at home, and it's hard to settle them down, particularly in the early grades. I had a first grade teacher. She developed a ritual where when the kids came into the room, there was a piece of white paper, blank paper on the desk, and she would say, "Okay, here's what," she trained them to do this, and she said, "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you a story, and then I want you to think about your own stories." She said, "My job is to teach you today. Your job is to learn from me today. In order to do that, we really have to focus on what we are doing. I'm having trouble focusing right now." And one of the kids said, "Why?" And I observed this.
Mhm.
She said, "Well, my daughter's a gymnast, and she was supposed to be in a huge state competition this weekend. And last night she sprained her ankle, and she can't be in the competition. And I'm very sad about that." And I keep thinking about that, but I can't afford to think about that because I need to help you today. She said, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to draw a picture of my daughter. I'm going to draw a picture of her broken ankle. I'm going to fold it up and put it away. And we're going to talk about it at the end of the day. So right now, whatever's on your mind, it's your birthday, you're getting a present, you got a new cat, whatever. Draw the picture. We're not going to talk about it. We'll fold it up and we'll talk at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, the ritual was who wants to share?
Mm.
And and kids would tell each other, here, these are 6-year-olds. And
Mm.
they would say, no, no, Mrs. Price said, we'll talk about it later. We're not going to talk about that now. So she took that ordinary moment of every day and made it extraordinary for the kids. So that's kind of key.
Oh,
One
that's
of the things.
very
So
creative.
rituals. Yeah. And the other thing that rituals and traditions do is they ground a child and make them understand that they're part of something bigger
Mm.
than themselves, and they have a responsibility to the bigger picture. So
Yeah.
they won't be as self-centered, maybe. And that's the hope,
Yeah.
that they will consider others more.
Well, yeah, we need to feed a lot of that into the generations today.
Absolutely. I mean, truly, my parents had more time to do that because it's so much busier now,
Yeah.
but it still can happen today. And it doesn't have to happen fast. Over time, kids will see it.
Yeah. Oh, that's so wonderful. Wow. I love everything that you said. I mean, just all the tips about children and bringing them up today. It's a lot of great knowledge there.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the knowledge comes from my experiences of being an old lady and having 4 decades of working with it and watching it. But, I basically say to my parents, you know, parenting, as I said, is a journey, it's not a destination. And there are basically 3 pillars of intentional parenting, in my estimation.
Okay.
What do parents really need to do? They need to be observant. They need to really pay attention and observe their children when they're with them and when they're sort of aside and they can just watch them to learn the individual personalities of their kids because no 2 kids are alike.
Mm.
And in the book, I have a bunch of rules that you don't break. My father had some very clear rules, you know, one of which is you never ever call someone stupid, ever, you know.
Mhm.
And we talked a lot about why you don't do that in communication and relationships and all of that. But you want to observe your children constantly and you want to know what are their likes, what are their dislikes. That child is going to be different than the sibling. Maybe there'll be some similarities, there probably will be, but there might be some major differences. And you need to attend to that. You need to know what makes them afraid. And the way to know that, it's all communication. These pillars are communication. You have to ask and you have to notice, did that scare you? Why? You know? I remember one time I was observing a physician who was treating my mother at the time. She had cancer and he was an oncologist and he never smiled. He
Hmm.
never, ever smiled when he came in the room. And it was very apparent when my mother was getting worse and he came into the room and we were all stressed. And I noticed it, I observed it, and I followed him out in the hall and I said, can I talk to you for a minute? He said, sure. And I said, I want to ask you a question. Please be honest with me. And he said, yeah. And I said, who did you lose to this disease?
Oh.
And he said, why are you asking? I said, because you are so sad about it. Your patients need you to be optimistic and happy, even at the end. They
Mm.
need hope. Don't take it away. I said, you come in like it's another loss already.
Yeah.
And he just said, oh my God. And he said, I lost my dad. And I said, okay. And from that day on, he smiled.
Oh.
But again, it was observing, it was saying,
Mhm.
hey, come in with a little. So observing constantly so that, you might have one child who cringes when you raise your voice. Pay attention to that. The other one loves the fight, so you have to kind of adjust what you're doing too. The second pillar is to listen actively. And that means you really listen. You're not multitasking when your child is trying to tell you something. I've had some parents say, well, yeah, that's really good when I can talk with them when they're in middle school. I said, no, when they're 1 and 2 and 3. If they come to you with a drawing and say, mommy, look, don't say, yeah, okay. Because if you dismiss the things they're interested in telling you when they're little, when they're 14 and 15 and they're having problems that are serious, they won't come to you.
Mhm.
You want them to come to you. So listen actively. And the third pillar is to model carefully because your kids are watching you from when they're little. And if they see a mom or a dad who's very kind and compassionate and caring and giving, they will become that. If they see someone who is yelling all the time or putting someone down, they'll do that too. And
Mhm.
they'll become a bully. So you are the model. When I was writing the book, I called my sister and I said, when did you ever see dad mad, really angry where he could spit? And she said, I can think of maybe one time in my whole life. He just was the kind, he just would, it isn't that he wasn't angry, it's that he would stop, pause,
Mhm.
and then delve into why did you do that? And what I say to parents is, you're going to make mistakes. I'm not telling you you can't yell at anybody, but what I'm saying to you is if your kid is watching and you observe the reaction, or you've made a mistake, then admit it and say, yeah, I shouldn't have talked to that clerk like that because it's not her fault that the price went up and it's double
Mhm.
or it's not what's listed on the counter. She's not the one who put the price tag on it. It's somebody in the office. So why treat her badly? That kind of thing. So observing, listening, and modeling are three very important actions that parents need to take intentionally all the time.
Yeah, those are very good pillars. I like that a lot. So, well, I'm going to have your contact information and a link to your book in the media section and underneath. And I tell you what, we'll even do Giant Builders. If you leave a comment in the YouTube version of this, I will have a drawing and give away one of Rosemary's books. And I think that will be very impactful, either to yourself or maybe it would be a gift to a parent who might needs a little inspiration. So, well, Rosemary, any closing thoughts?
Um, yeah, I would just say that, if anyone goes to my website, which is rosemaryolender.com, or they want to email me, I'd be happy to send them. It's sort of a parent questionnaire, connectivity questionnaire, so that they can, for themselves, so that they can take a look at it and say, where might we want to work on this a little bit? I'd be happy if they would email me, I'd be happy to send them one.
Okay. All right. So I'll make sure the email is below too. All right.
Okay. All right.
Well, thank you so much. You have some great, great inspiration to share with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you and Happy New Year to everybody.
All right, Jamie Builders, we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening. This has been The Giant Builders with Lois Wyant.